G'day folks, I'm Dr. Zoe Mitchell, and I've been working as a sexual health physician here in Australia for over 20 years now. Today, I want to have a proper yarn with you about something that affects heaps of older blokes but rarely gets talked about openly. We're going to chat about self-pleasure in your later years, what it means for your body and mind, and I reckon by the end of this, you'll have a much clearer picture of what's actually going on. Now, before we dive in, I want to say something important. I've sat across from thousands of men in my clinic over the years, from tradies to executives, farmers from out bush to city fellas, and let me tell you, this topic comes up way more than you'd think. The difference is, most of the time, blokes are too embarrassed to bring it up first. So, if you've ever wondered about this stuff, you're definitely not alone, mate. Right, let's get stuck into it. Frank's 82 years old, still sharp as a tack, lives down in Melbourne with his wife of 55 years. His wife had a major surgery about 15 years back, and since then, intimacy between them just wasn't on the cards anymore. But here's the thing, Frank's still got desires, still got that drive, and he'd been taking care of things himself a couple of times a week for all those years. He came to me worried sick because he'd seen some video online telling him he was doing himself damage. Poor bloke was stressed out of his mind. I told Frank what I'm going to tell you today. There's a lot of rubbish floating around on the internet about this topic, and it's time we set the record straight with some fair dinkum science. So what actually happens when older men engage in self-pleasure? Let's break it down properly, starting with the basics. As we age, our bodies go through natural changes. Your testosterone levels, which peaked when you were a young fella in your 20s, gradually decline over the decades. By the time you hit 60, 70, 80, your hormone profile looks quite different from what it used to be. But here's what a lot of people get wrong. Having lower testosterone doesn't mean your sex drive disappears completely. It just changes, mate. It might not be as urgent or as frequent, but for many blokes it's still very much there. A study published in the Journal of Sexual Medicine back in Muisao looked at sexual activity in men over 65 across several countries, including Australia. You know what they found? A significant percentage of men, well into their 70s and 80s, reported regular sexual activity, including masturbation. This isn't some rare thing, fellas. It's completely normal. Now let's talk about what happens in your body when you engage in self-stimulation. When you become aroused and reach climax, your brain releases a cocktail of chemicals. We're talking about endorphins, dopamine, and oxytocin. These are your body's natural feel-good chemicals. Endorphins act like natural painkillers and mood boosters. Dopamine gives you that sense of pleasure and satisfaction. Oxytocin, sometimes called the bonding hormone, helps with relaxation and can even lower your blood pressure temporarily. For older blokes, this chemical release can have some genuine benefits. I've had patients tell me they sleep better after self-pleasure. That's not in their heads. That's real science. The relaxation response that follows orgasm can help with sleep quality. And we all know how important good sleep becomes as we get older. When you're not sleeping well, everything else suffers. Your mood, your energy, your ability to think clearly. There's another benefit that doesn't get talked about enough, and that's maintaining the health of your equipment, if you know what I mean. Use it or lose it isn't just an old saying. There's actually research behind it. Regular sexual activity, including masturbation, helps maintain blood flow to the genital area. This is particularly important for erectile function. When blood flows regularly to these tissues, it helps keep them healthy and functioning. Blokes who go long periods without any sexual activity sometimes find it harder to achieve erections when they do want to engage in intimacy. A urologist mate of mine up in Brisbane, he always tells his patients that the penis is like any other part of the body. If you don't exercise your legs, they get weak. Same principle applies down there. Regular activity helps maintain function. Now, I want to address something that came up with a patient of mine recently. He'd read somewhere that masturbation causes prostate cancer. Let me be crystal clear on this one. That is absolute bulldust. There is no credible scientific evidence linking masturbation to prostate cancer. In fact, some research suggests the opposite might be true. A Harvard study that followed thousands of men over nearly 2 decades found that men who ejaculated more frequently actually had a lower risk of prostate cancer. Now, I'm not saying masturbation prevents cancer. That would be oversimplifying things. But the idea that it causes cancer is simply not supported by the evidence. Similarly, there's no evidence that self-pleasure accelerates aging, damages your organs, or causes any of the other scary things you might read about online. These myths have been floating around for centuries, and they're just not true. But here's where I need to be straight with you, and this is important. While masturbation itself isn't harmful, like anything in life, balance matters, and this is where some blokes can run into trouble. I had another patient, we'll call him Doug. Doug was 74, widower, lived alone in a unit in Sydney. After his wife passed, Doug found himself turning to self-pleasure more and more. At first, it was just a way to deal with the loneliness, to feel something good in a really difficult time. But over the months, it became more frequent, sometimes multiple times a day. Doug started noticing he was less interested in going out, seeing his mates, doing the things he used to enjoy. He was using self-pleasure as a way to cope with his grief and isolation, and it was becoming a bit of a crutch. This is what we call compulsive behavior, and it can happen with anything that gives us pleasure: food, alcohol, gambling, you name it. The activity itself isn't the problem. It's when it starts taking over other aspects of your life that we need to pay attention. For Doug, we worked together on finding other ways to manage his grief. He joined a men's shed, started volunteering at the local footy club, reconnected with his grandkids. The self-pleasure didn't stop, nor should it have, but it found its proper place as one part of a balanced life, not the main event. So what are the signs that things might be getting a bit out of balance? If you're finding that you're spending hours each day focused on self-pleasure, if it's interfering with your daily activities or responsibilities, if you're feeling worse rather than better afterwards, if it's replacing rather than complementing other sources of connection and satisfaction, these might be signals to have a think about what's going on. Let me share what one of my long-term patients told me recently. Barry's 83, been coming to see me for about 12 years now. His situation is similar to Frank's. His wife had some health issues that meant intimacy between them wasn't possible anymore. Barry's been looking after his own needs a couple of times a week for years, and he's fit as a fiddle. He told me, and I'm sharing this with his permission, that maintaining this part of his life has helped him stay connected to his own body, helped him feel like he's still got some control over his physical self, even as other things have changed with age. Barry made an important point that I want to pass on. He said he's never felt guilty about it, because he knows it's a normal part of being human. He's stayed faithful to his wife. They have a loving relationship, and this is just one way he manages his own needs. No drama, no shame, just a practical approach to life. That attitude makes such a difference, fellas. So many blokes I see carry around guilt about this stuff because of messages they got growing up. Maybe you were told it was sinful, or dirty, or harmful. Those messages can stick with us for decades, and they can turn something natural into a source of anxiety and shame. From a medical and psychological perspective, sexuality is a normal part of human life at every age. It doesn't have an expiry date. Your desires might change, your body might respond differently than it did when you were 30, but the capacity for pleasure and connection remains. Now, let's talk about some practical considerations for older blokes. Your body at 70 or 80 is different from your body at 30, and that's okay. It might take longer to become aroused, and that's normal. Erections might not be as firm as they once were, and that's also normal. You might need more direct stimulation to achieve orgasm. Completely normal. None of these changes mean anything is wrong with you. They're just part of the aging process. Some men find that using a bit of lubricant helps, especially as skin becomes less elastic with age. There's no shame in that, it's just being practical. If you're having significant difficulties with erectile function, that's worth a chat with your GP. There are treatments available, but more importantly, erectile difficulties can sometimes be an early warning sign of cardiovascular issues, so it's worth getting checked out. I want to touch on something else that's come up with several of my patients over the years. Some blokes who are in relationships find themselves preferring self-pleasure to intimacy with their partner. This is worth paying attention to. Intimacy with another person involves vulnerability, communication, and sometimes dealing with complicated feelings. Self-pleasure is simpler, more predictable, entirely in your control. Neither one is better or worse than the other inherently, but if you're in a relationship and finding yourself consistently choosing to go solo rather than connect with your partner, it might be worth thinking about why. Sometimes there are underlying relationship issues that need addressing. Sometimes it's about body image or performance anxiety. Sometimes it's just about convenience and energy levels. But maintaining intimate connection with a partner has benefits that self-pleasure doesn't provide: emotional bonding, physical closeness, the oxytocin boost from skin-to-skin contact with another person. If this resonates with you, consider having an honest conversation with your partner. I know that's easier said than done for a lot of blokes. We're not always great at talking about this stuff. But most partners appreciate honesty, and you might find they're dealing with their own feelings about changes in your intimate life. Right. Let's talk about something that's come up more recently with the blokes I see. The internet has made it incredibly easy to access sexual content, and some older men are discovering this for the first time, or engaging with it much more than they did before. Now, I'm not here to tell you what to do in your own time. You're adults, you can make your own choices, but I will say this. If you're finding that you need more and more stimulation to feel aroused, if regular intimacy or regular self-pleasure without visual aids isn't doing it for you anymore, that might be a sign of desensitization. The brain is remarkably adaptable, which is both a blessing and a challenge. If you consistently pair sexual arousal with a particular type of stimulation, your brain starts to expect that. Some men find they need to take a break from external stimulation to recalibrate, to get back to a point where their own imagination or touch is enough. Let me circle back to something I mentioned earlier about the mental health aspects. Self-pleasure releases feel-good chemicals, and that's a genuine benefit. But it's a temporary one. Those chemicals don't stay elevated for long. If you're using self-pleasure primarily as a way to manage depression, anxiety, loneliness, or grief, you might get short-term relief, but you're not addressing the underlying issues. I see this particularly in blokes who've lost partners, who've retired and lost their sense of purpose, who've become isolated from their communities. The physical pleasure provides a brief respite from difficult feelings, but when those feelings keep coming back, it's a sign that other support is needed. That might mean talking to a counselor, joining a social group, reconnecting with family, finding new activities that give you a sense of meaning. In Australia, we've got some great resources for older blokes. Beyond Blue has a fantastic program specifically for men. The Men's Shed movement is brilliant for combating isolation. Many community health centres offer low-cost counselling. If you're struggling, please reach out. There's no shame in getting a bit of help. Now, I want to address the partners and families who might be watching this. Sometimes older men's sexual behaviour can be confusing or concerning for family members, particularly if there are signs of cognitive decline. Changes in sexual behaviour can sometimes be an early indicator of conditions like dementia. If your dad or granddad is suddenly behaving in ways that seem out of character, particularly if there are other signs of memory or judgment issues, it's worth getting a medical assessment. But also remember that older people have the same right to privacy and sexuality as anyone else. Don't assume that any expression of sexuality in an older person is a problem. Let me give you the takeaway messages from today's chat. First, self-pleasure in older age is completely normal and, in moderation, can have genuine health benefits. Second, there's no credible evidence that it causes cancer, accelerates aging, or damages your body. Third, like anything pleasurable, balance is key. If it's becoming compulsive or replacing other important aspects of life, that's worth addressing. Fourth, guilt and shame are not helpful. Sexuality is a normal part of being human at every age. Fifth, if you're struggling with related issues, whether that's erectile function, compulsive behavior, depression, or relationship problems, help is available. I've been doing this work for over 2 decades now, and I can tell you that the blokes who navigate this best are the ones who approach their sexuality with a matter-of-fact attitude. They don't dramatize it or feel guilty about it. But they also don't let it dominate their lives. They maintain other sources of pleasure and connection. They stay active physically and socially, and they're not afraid to ask for help when they need it. One more thing before I wrap up. If you've watched videos before that made you feel scared or guilty about this topic, I want you to know that a lot of that content is rubbish. There are people out there who make money by getting you worried about things that aren't actually problems. Always look for information from credible medical sources. And don't be afraid to ask your own GP. Most doctors have heard it all before and won't be shocked by anything you bring up. I had a bloke in his late 70s tell me once that he wished someone had given him this information decades ago, that it would have saved him years of unnecessary worry. That's part of why I do these videos, to get straightforward, evidence-based information out there so you can make your own informed decisions about your health and your life. You've lived a long time, fellas. You've got experience and wisdom. You deserve accurate information, not scare tactics. So take what's useful from today's chat. Leave what isn't. And remember that taking care of yourself in all its forms is nothing to be ashamed of. Thanks for listening today, folks. If you found this helpful, please share it with a mate who might benefit. And if you've got questions, leave them in the comments. I try to answer as many as I can, and your questions often give me ideas for future videos. Look after yourselves, stay connected with your communities, and remember that good health includes all aspects of who you are. Cheers, and I'll catch you next time.